So she started talking about being taken into these underground military bases and seeing these tubes and things look like creatures in liquid, and they're like in their gestation, is vast underground stuff. Not only from her, but from others. And I remember working with a woman that is a biological daughter of Prince Philip years ago, and fly out to Las Vegas where she lived. She's a multiple, and her mother was Marie Helena de Rothschild of France, and very unique personality. And she said, she had a little part to come out named Rachel. She said, Mr. Doug, I mean, she's this almost 6 foot woman and just real childlike, likes to play around, be goofy. She says, Mr. Doug, can I tell you a secret? I said, yeah. I said, you know, in the Caesar's Palace, you can go way down, and down the basement, there's a satanic throne there. And they do all these rituals and they do this stuff. And he says, you know what else? There's a doorway there, and you can go through it, and you can be at Area 51, Groom Lake, in about 10 minutes. And she says, let me tell you another secret. Did you know that Area 51 don't know anything about that? Because it takes special rites of passage to get down there. I said, what's going on down there? She said, the Nephilim Project. 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 The Nephilim Project.
What is that your Trey Smith impression?
Yeah. And God said.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures, where we're having a hard time getting
Trey Smith
on the show. We've gotten everybody else: Dr. Michael Heiser, L.A. Marzulli, Jeff Meldrum,
Dr. Laura Sanger,
Tim Tebow,
and the unstoppable Dr. Judd Burden.
I'm trying to get some athletes on the show, but Luke's holding out on me.
Am I?
Dang you, Luke.
Yeah.
You got all these athletic friends, and I want to get weird already. All right.
Michael Jordan, get him on here. He's not my friend, but I'd like to be friends. He's like the only athlete I'm like, I was 12 years old. I had like 100 of your basketball cards. Come on the show. Be a great 80s
Did you meet Jordan?
reference. I have met Michael Jordan. Yes.
It's a little weird.
I met a lot of famous people, Nate, and I don't mean that in like any sort of bragging or like humble brags or way, but that was the only person I was like, wow. Like 12-year-old Luke was like, wow, this is
MJ. What an intro for Blurry Creatures here. We're all over the place. Today we have Doug Riggs on the show. It's gonna blow your minds. It's very heavy. If you like our Dr. Laura Sanger episodes, then you'll like these ones. And if you don't like the crazy hybrids, getting into some of the end time stuff, this might not be the show for you. But if you're into it and you like to get
weird. No, we've got all kinds. I mean, but Doug is a master, right? This is who Laura's referenced a bunch of times. He works with high trauma Nephilim host mothers, as we talked about in our members only chat, and he's gonna unpack some things that have to do with World War II and Hitler and what the Nazis were trying to do, and then bring that up to today, and then also go all the way back to the Old Testament and connect all of those things when we talk about hybrids and the DNA wars that we like to cover on the show.
All right, let's get Doug on the show.
Let's get him on.
Well, welcome to the show, Doug. You're pastor at Morning Star Testimony Church and you talk a lot about the things that we talk about on our show. Welcome, and thanks for being here. We have a tradition on our show, Doug. We ask everybody, and there's no wrong answer.
There's no right answer either, though.
There's no right answer either, yeah. I'm waiting for you to say that, Luke.
Dude, but you've been setting me up for episodes. There's no right answer either.
Doug, what do you think about Bigfoot? Do you have any thoughts about that creature? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've never really delved into that. I haven't worked with people that have actually talked about these kinds of entities. But if they are real and they are as they've been reported, in my mind, there's only one option, that they are some form of a modern day hybrid. In other words, they're not, there's nothing extraterrestrial. They are not fully human, obviously. But if they're humanoid, that would fit the category of some of the creatures that we see in the first book of Enoch. Could be something of a blended DNA splice with other creatures that would be humanoid, because I know that these are part of the projects that are currently been happening over several decades now.
So if you had to put an age on Bigfoot, how old do you think these creatures would be, based on your research?
I don't have any idea. If they're hybrids, of course, the ones that are now being reported, they gestate faster than human beings. But as far as what the longevity is, that's really not my venue. That's more of something as an externalized research. Mine is always in the context of severe abuse, generational satanic ritual abuse, and what takes place in various venues, underground dumbs. Things have been going on for a long time, where there are what we actually see recorded, and I said in the first book of Enoch, those kinds of things have been going on for some time. So where he would fit into the plethora of that, which is a part of the hybrid breeding program, I could see there's a potentiality, but I couldn't speak definitively as to that particular entity described as a Bigfoot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about on this show about it being a hybrid, and that's what I think. It has capabilities, like our last guest, Tim Alvarino, was talking about, how it can mind speak, it can talk to you, can communicate telepathically, which is very interesting, as a lot of people describe that.
Well, that would be a hybrid, because if it's a certain level hybrid, they have that capacity because they're not fully human. Therefore, they have supernatural capacities that are satanically driven. So that would fit more with the actual hybrid scenario. Interesting.
Maybe we can jump into that, Luke. Talk about.
Yeah, I was going to say so. Doug, just for a little background with us, we've like Nate said at the top, we've had Laura on a few times, and the last time she started talking about, I really got into hybrids and the Nephilim host mother and those projects, and she's mentioned you a bunch of times. Is why we reached out. One of the things she kind of brushed on, and then actually when I reached out to her last week to ask her about what she would recommend we talk to you about, she talked about a third strand of DNA that was imparted to Hitler by Satan, and how that relates.
You just dove right in, Luke.
The biblical Nimrod. Yeah, I want to do this. This is fascinating to me. Into the biblical Nimrod and the hybrids being birthed in our generation, and it's kind of a question, but we're just wondering if you could explain your understanding of that and how that happened, and how that's. And is that really the genesis point that we're seeing for the hybrid stuff today? Is World War II?
I think there's two different sides. There's that which people describe as alien grays and the reptilian. These are not quintessential hybrids. These would be more like the mutations of the ongoing program. But that which is quintessential, in other words, Antichrist is clearly a hybrid. We know that because in Revelation 19:20, he's thrown in the lake of fire with the false prophet. They don't stand before the great white throne judgment. Why? They're therion, they're beasts, so that means they're not fully human. But when it comes to the creation of man, I believe that when man, and it's not like something you can prove, but when man was created in the image of God, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. God created him and called him man, male and female. All right, so people want to kind of get intellectual about this and say this is the divine council there in association with the Elohim. And I don't buy that at all. I believe that the three there is the archetypal representation of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. In three in one, speaking and creating God in his image. All right. So if there's three in one Godhead in the creation of man, then man's going to bear that image. So it's going to be threefold. And physically, it is our spirit, soul, and body. That's who we are in our humanity as a person. So when God created Adam, the double helix that we now know how our DNA structure is in mankind as we know it now, where's the third strand? There's something missing. So I believe what happened when God created Adam, that the third strand is spiritual. It is that which represents the capacity when God walked with Adam in the garden, they had fellowship. God spoke to Adam and said, if any of the trees in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat, it is a Hebrew infinitive, dying, you will certainly die. So in the day that he ate, he died, but he's still solically alive, physically alive for another, 930 years, but he died that day. So what happened? That third spiritual in his DNA died. And now there's a sin code there. So that sin code, Satan knows about this. We know from Job chapter 38 that when the earth was created, the B'nai Elohim were there and were rejoicing. So the angelic creatures were created before the earth. So we now have a sin code that's there. Now the question is, can that sin code be accessed by Satan? And I believe absolutely that the spirit that is now operating in the sons of disobedience in Ephesians chapter 2, that Satan has access and can actuate humanity through the sin code in a dead human spirit. Now, if we go back to the conception, because we were the ones that first reported this many years ago, of the Hitler project, that was, it's very, it take a long time to unpack it, but Hitler had a vested desire to create this super race, this Aryan race, and for him to have a species, Laban's born, they did all this backbreeding to try to create a Ubermensch, a Superman. So what qualified Hitler to be the human mechanism to initiate a quintessential hybrid? Because the Antichrist is not going to come on the scene looking like something weird. He's not going to look like Sasquatch. All right. So he's going to come as Antichristus. That is he's going to come as a substitute for the Christ. Yeah. You're going to say he's quintessential man.
Right.
He's the ultimate evolutionary goal of all the New Agers and everything. All right. So what happens? A conception event that actually inaugurated the beginning of the hybrid breeding program that would bring forth quintessential representations of the Antichrist, the hybrid. Well, there was a massive conception event. There's Hitler, the kings of the earth, and there's the convergence on all the previous bloodlines that became the Collins. You've probably heard of the Collins elite, but this is the actual convergence of the previous kings of the earth, and then with the splicing in of the Hitler bloodline and Satan. Because Hitler qualified to the sacrifice of 6 million Jews, the blood ritual, he qualified to receive a DNA download directly from Satan that is the DNA of Nimrod. And that is the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the revivification of Nimrod. All right, so in that third strand that he created, you can't see it, but it now takes the place of what was there when God created man and when he fell. And so there is a third strand. Like, for example, I was working with the SRA survivors the other day, and we were working, and she drew a strand, the helix. Then she drew a line right down the middle. And she said, as she was connecting internally with who she was as a part of the project, I said, what's that third strand? She says, that's Nimrod. That's the strand that capacitates the breeders to conceive a hybrid.
Wow.
Because it's not normal. It's outside God's order. We now have numerous women we worked with throughout the several decades that were chosen, selected to be breeders of the bloodlines and to create a contemporary generations of Nimrod, Apollyon, Alexander the Christ. That's kind of where we are, and that's a lot to unpack, but that's probably as short as I can make it.
Well, I mean, we're there, Luke. I mean, we've been there on their show. We often joke about the show could be called DNA Wars because we've been trying to figure that out. Yeah. But I was just arguing with a friend the other night that I think that when Adam fell in the garden, it was a genetic change. It was a DNA change, which is why everyone from then on in was affected, because that's not what I was taught growing up. It was more like, well, Adam sinned and then everyone else was sinful. And I was like, wait, like a genetic change would make sense because then it's not something you can repair without coming back to the family of God. So you mentioned a couple other creatures. You mentioned gray aliens, insectolins. What is your interpretation of those creatures, specifically how it relates to these hybrids?
It's so, the people who are born in the project have been taken into the deep underground military bases with a lattice of tunnel working basically all over the world. They've got these huge boring machines we know about.
Mm-hmm.
They can bore through 40 feet in diameter tunnels and 10 miles a day. I mean, you can see the technology. So that's been going on for a long time. So these deep underground bases are basically, there's networking and there's a breeding program going on, and there's a hybridization. So when Lucifer, who rebelled and became Satan, he fell, we know from Revelation 12, 1/3 of the angels went with him. So that means in his army, he has 1/3 of the original angels. So if he's going to wage war against God and defeat God, Revelation 19, verse 19, when there's no more nation rising against nation, and all the nations are under the aegis and headship of the Antichrist, all weapons are pointed towards heaven. And so like Russ Dizdar says, there has to be a sequence of the evolution that brings forth the final warfare when all weapons are pointed towards heaven. And his returning army, that's the church. We see his bride returning with him. So what's his intention? If he doesn't kill God, he loses. So in our mind, we say that's a psychopath that thinks like that.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. It is.
Isn't that's kind of what Nimrod was trying to do? Same thing, right?
Oh yeah. I believe the Tower of Babel is like a modern day CERN. Right. So he comes back, conquer mankind. So what does the devil Satan have to do to prepare for this final army? He's outnumbered. So if he can create not only a quintessential hybrid that will be representation of the current the Antichrist and false prophet, and I believe they're already currently alive. Then what else can he do to create an army? Well, if you look at the passage in Joel chapter 2, verse 11, it looks like there's a synchronized transhumanist army. They're all synchronized with one spirit, leaping over walls and that. These aren't grasshoppers, I believe. These are hybridized, part of the army of Satan. So he's going, in order to make up the deficit, he has to create an army. So all the alien abductions that we see, that is mainly harvesting ovum, sperm, what's the purpose? To gather human DNA to create this army. And all these so-called aliens, it's just a ruse. These are hybrids. These craft, they're made in America, TR-3B. We have the technology. We've seen these triangular crafts, the electrogravitic craft all over the world. They're made in America. Okay, so who flies them and what's the purpose? Well, there's all this abduction and alien abductions have been going on for a long time. If you read Dr. David Jacobs, who is a professor of ufology, the only accredited course in the United States at Temple University in Pennsylvania, he describes in his 40 years experience that these abductions it's a breeding program, and is designed to create an offspring. In his mind, they call them aliens. They're hybrids. They're not from some other outer space. They're bred right here. And so what is their goal? His words are this, in his book called The Threat, is to completely take over. And so that we become the slaves and they become a master race. And that's the way it was in Genesis 6 before the flood. We're in Numbers 13, verse 32. It says the land was devouring their inhabitants. Kana Baal. Yeah. That's where the cannibalism originated from in the antediluvian civilization. So we have a program that's going on now that is to infiltrate the human race and to reach a place where they're not detectable. And so if you read Dr. David Jacobs' most recent book, They Walk Among Us, I mean, this guy's a PhD historian. He said they're integrating with humanity now. And the goal is to completely to do away with humanity as we know it. So what's the agenda? Jesus says, in Matthew 24, had not those days been shortened that lead up to the coming of the Son of Man, no flesh would be saved. What do we think? Well, that would all be blown up by nuclear bombs. Not at all. There would be no flesh savable because the goal is to hybridize everybody. And if you take the mark of the beast, it'll be a DNA upgrade. You will lose your soul. We know from Scripture, 100% of those that take the mark are going to be damned. So Satan's goal is to completely eliminate that which is savable and thus prove God a liar and to win and conquer that which is the human race. He's dead set on this. He's a criminal. He's got severe pathology, but he's extremely intelligent, and he's absolutely the quintessential of hatred against God and hatred against mankind. So there is an agenda, and that agenda is satanically driven. The whole global reset, all this, the synchronized lockdown, and all that's happened for the first time in history, is governed strictly by a satanic power, synchronizing mankind, preparing mankind for the final denouement, the final closing act, which will finally will result in the last 7 weeks of Daniel's prophecy, and of course it'll end up in Armageddon. So I'll pause there.
Wow.
Nate, it makes me think like it's almost like Lord of the Rings. Like Sauron needs to build this army, right? So he builds his army
Underground.
of hybrid orcs. This whole underground. He births these elf hybrids. That's what they are. They're corrupt. No, they're these corrupted hybrids that the Dark Lord creates for his army for this final battle. It's funny how Tolkien he kind of unwrapped a lot of this stuff in.
He just stole from history books.
In his novel, he really did. Yeah. I mean, Doug, can we go back to the Nimrod thing real quick? Because I know that you touched on it, but there was this line for Nimrod, and then you related how Nimrod discerned, and what was Nimrod doing then that parallels what? Can you relate those two things for us, just even for my head to understand?
Yeah, let me go back to Genesis 10 here. Let me look at the passage here real quick. The account of Nimrod in Genesis 10. The statement is made there with, it was given rather, I should say, Genesis 10:8. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod, and he became a mighty one on the earth. The word mighty one is Gibor. The Nephilim are referred to as Hal-Giborim in Genesis 6:4. Okay, Giborim. The Septuagint is Gigantus, the giants. Okay. All right, so it's the same term used for mighty men. Now, every time you find Gibborim, David had mighty men. He had Gibborim, and they were not hybrids. They're just mighty. So the context has to determine how Gibor or Gibborim, which is plural, how is it used?
Just linebackers. David had a bunch of linebackers.
So we see Nimrod. He became a Gibor on the earth, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or we could I think Hislop and others said, against the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the way it's usually picked up traditionally, he was a hunter of man's souls. So he was the first transhumanist. In other words, how did he attain this status? All right. Then the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel wasn't just something that represents a way to escape the flood. We know that in the ancient iconography, and the top was a zodiac, and so when you ascend the top, there was a ritual marriage, and that was the place where man could unite with God. So Babel in the Hebrew means confusion, but in the Babylonian it means gate of the gods. So to ascend, and that's basically what Hitler was after, to reach that place where man could transition to Ubermensch, a God man. That was the whole goal. And so for Nimrod to ascend to God man status, something was in that particular tower that was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a generating, it was some kind of a device. It was some kind of advanced technology, so that as you come into ascension, term for it that we see Washington in the Capitol, where he's seen in ascension in the Dome of the Rock, the dome of the Capitol. So he goes through a process where I believe his DNA was changed, and so when you see pictures of Gilgamesh holding a lion, I believe that's just another title for Nimrod, in his arms. I mean, he actually went through a process of transformation. There's a term for it. I don't know if it's transmogrify or whatever, but he went through a process. All right. What happens when he dies? If he's no longer fully human, where did he go? The Bible says that the Antichrist ascends out of the abyss. The abyss, I believe, is a synonym for Tartarus. What's Tartarus for? That's where the rebellious angels ascend in Genesis 6. They, according to 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, and Jude 6 and 7, they were cast into Tartarus, a prison for the rebellious angels, Genesis 6. I believe that's where he went, because the Bible says he ascends out of the abyss. So we know the whole Phoenix rising paradigm in the occult theme, that Nimrod, he actually ascends out of the abyss. And everybody wonders, because he had the mortal wound of fate. And people think, well, that he gets killed in the tribulation, he comes back. No, I think this wound of fate, this mortal wound that he received, goes back to the killing of Nimrod. Some people say it was Shem. I don't know for sure who killed him, but he was cut into pieces. So he's come back. This is Phoenix rising. That's deeply in the occult. And so he's back on the stage of world history. I mean, Nimrod is back. Whoa, what does all this mean? They all worship him as God, because Nimrod is the first Antichrist in world history. So he comes back on the world scene, and he is now, his name and all the rituals that where he has been seen in his current form is Nimrod, Apollyon, Alexander. That's his name. What does that mean? Nimrod, that's his ancient roots. Apollyon, that's his nature, the destroyer. Alexander, he's like Alexander coming back on the scene. He died of dissipation, drunkenness in 32 BC. No, at age 32 and 3 something BC. He dies. And he was in the process of bringing the world under Hellenism, like a new age unified thinking. He died. So if his public debut is going to be Alexander means defender of mankind. So he comes on as this big hero, but in the middle of the trib, he manifests his true colors, and he's now Nimrod Apollyon, and all hell breaks loose. So man is drawn into the net. He's seen as Antichristus, a substitute for Christ, and the whole world follows after him, like we see in Revelation 13, who is like this beast, this hybrid, and who can make war against him. So I think that's where we are in history. I believe that we're right here on the cusp of his revelation. And this year, December 25th, Nimrod's birthday, this is designed to be a grand finale. So we know that everything is converging in terms of the synchronization to bring forth the Antichrist. And I believe we're right on the cusp of that, what is about to occur. And so I'd say, church, where are you today?
Wow.
Are you aware of where we are in history?
Yeah.
Do you know that you know, pastors, that we're living in the final generation? There's not going to be another generation, that we don't know the day or the hour. But Jesus says you can discern the sky, and therefore, why are you foolish generation? Can you not discern the sign of the times? So we can know absolutely we're living in the final generation, even though we don't know the day or the hour. And we're in that final generation.
Well, that's what we do in Blurry Creatures. It's just two knuckleheads trying to get to the truth, right? We don't have anyone that can shut us down yet, so that's what we're after. You said something really good there that I wanted to kind of lead into another question. You said that Nimrod was thrown into the abyss, and so a lot of guys have come on our show and talk about the original Watchers were thrown into the abyss. So you believe that that people were sent to the abyss multiple times in history, and does that have anything to do with the second incursion, that another group of angels might have corrupted creation again after the flood and also have been sent there? Seems like it's like the Lord's jail or something.
Well, we have to understand from 2 Peter 2:4 that Tartarus was only a place for the Titans, the rebellious angels. So Tartarus and or the abyss, I believe, are synonymous. So those rebellious angels were imprisoned for their sin in Genesis 6. Okay. So I don't see anywhere in Scripture where mankind goes into Tartarus or the abyss. They go to Hades. It's a holding station before they're judged and sent into Gehenna, which is not occupied yet. That's a lake of fire. Okay, we know that. So those that would be sent to Tartarus, say after the Genesis 6 incursion and that judgment, there are those that believe that in the flood was actually God's judgment on that antediluvian civilization, because the Genesis 3:15, the seed war, which began there in Genesis 3:15, the first manifestation of that seed war is Genesis 6. So if Satan's going to attack the seed of the woman, he must corrupt that seed so that Messiah will not come. So to corrupt it. And so we see the first incursion there in Genesis 6:1-4. Genesis 6:9, it says Noah was pure, tamim, that is sound, whole, in his generation. So his genetic makeup was not corrupted. So only Noah and his family were genetically pure. And so God wiped out the rest of the humanity. And some say there's 12, 13 billion people. I mean, I have no way of verifying this, but it was huge. And so there was only just a small handful left. And then it says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Now, some say afterward was only in the antediluvian civilization. I believe afterward means exactly that, after the flood. It's just very simple.
Yeah.
So if you read E.W. Bullinger's account on the flood, he said they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. You can look at the appendix of the Companion Bible. You can look at it online, appendix number 23 and 25. We see his notes on this event. And so what do we have? That was a global phenomenon. That was a judgment. And what he says, and G.H. Pember in his book, Earth's Early Stages, which was released in 1876, a Cambridge scholar, his book, he talks about all this. And he said that, and same with Bullinger, that after the flood, there was another incursion, but it was more limited and restricted to the land of Canaan. Why? That was the promised land. So Satan is going to now attack the seed of the woman through the seed of Abraham. And so Joshua was given the instructions to wipe out every man, woman, and child and beast in the environment of Canaan. Why? Because it was hybridized. It was an attack on the seed. It wasn't like Dawkins says that God's a genocidal maniac. There's a reason for this. He's preserving the gene pool. So we have a more restricted and confined another incursion. And then I've talked to L.A. Marzulli about this. And I thought, and he believes exactly what I'm saying. There are others that want to say, well, the seed, that corrupt seed came through Ham's wife. Hey, hello. Since when does the sin code pass down through a woman? It never has been. It's always going to be through a male.
Sins of the father.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't buy in that at all.
Interesting. So, never thought about that.
And I was talking to Elliot about this one time, and he said, I not only believe in that more restricted incursion that happened, after the flood, like the scripture actually says, and also afterwards. By the way, I won't go into it now, but the actual Hebrew of Numbers 13, verse 33, there's two different spellings of the word Nephilim there. One represents an offspring of an original Nephilim, which are the sons of Anak. And it's very, very unique. It's very special. And they say that, hey, there's another incursion. I could look at Numbers 13:33, and I believe from the Hebrew, it actually prove that this is a second incursion. Well, we're talking to L.A. about this. He said, I believe in multiple incursions. Because we look at throughout history of giantism and all this, one of these, there would be incursions. The culture would go into great decadence, like in South America, and then these civilizations would be wiped out because this corruption was so great, and the enemy is trying to bring forth the end times, and God just brought in destruction and wipe out that, and there's nothing left. So I believe there's been multiple incursions throughout history. We know from Daniel chapter 2 and verse 43, I believe this is actually a prophecy of that which is spoken about, the final image there in Daniel chapter 2. I have a thing written on this somewhere in my file. We see this massive image of the combination of those four kingdoms from Babylon, Media, Persia, the Seleucid or the Grecian Empire, and Rome, revived Rome. What we see is in the toes section of this image in Daniel 2:42, and the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery. That is the mortality of what man is, made of the dust, clay. So some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And here it is, Daniel 2:43. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They, who are they? They will combine with one another in the seed of men. So the they and the seed of men are separate. In the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So Daniel 2:4 through chapter 7 is written in a cognate language known as Aramaic, the lingua franca of the Babylonian Empire. So it's similar in character as Hebrew, but it's got some differences. But in this passage, the Aramaic is very, very, very descriptive. And in that you saw the iron mixed, the word mixed and the word combined, twice used in 43 is the same word, arav. And it means it's used as a pledge or security used in marriages in the ancient East. They would use pledges or securities to combine kingdoms through covenants. There'd be marriage rituals.
Yeah.
And so this mixed combined is also used in the same Hebrew language in Ezra 9, verse 2, of the forbidding of the children of Israel to be involved with mixed marriage with foreigners. So I see right here is a prophecy of a final generation, that there will be a final incursion of these angels producing a hybridized kingdom known as the beast kingdom or the olive iron. All right. So it says that you saw the iron mixed, that is through mixed marriage with common clay. They will combine, again, the term means, through a marriage, and with one another in the seed of men. So who are they? Actually, Chuck Missler said, who are the they? I believe these are angelic beings, they. And they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine, same word again. So the word adhere is davak. So when God created Adam and Eve, it says, Adam, you're to leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife. That's davak. So there's some kind of a cleaving here that brings together the they and the seed of men into this configuration that's part of Daniel's end time vision leading up to the second coming of Christ. Now, I mentioned G.H. Pember, and his classic work was released in 1876. It's called Earth's Earliest Stages. So I read his book years ago. And he goes through, back then it was spiritism and Helena Pajava and Blavatsky, and talking about all kind of that thing that we were dealing with in terms of the culture. So that's kind of archaic in the terms of the framework he's working in. He was describing, I should say. So in his book, when you get to the end, it was the last chapter, he said this: like in the days of Noah, that was the first incursion that was worldwide. Mm-hmm. And then there was a more restrictive incursion that happened after the flood. That was the attempt of the fallen watchers, again, to corrupt the human gene pool and go after the seed of the woman, Genesis 3:15, by going after the seed of Abraham and those who were to inhabit and occupy the land. Right? And then here's what he said at the very end of his book. And I have it here. I've got one of the old versions. And here's what he said. In the last days leading up to and prior to the return of the Son of Man, there'll be a third and final incursion between fallen angels and with mankind on earth. And here's what he said: and there will once again be Nephilim walking the earth. Be Nephilim walking the earth. Be Nephilim walking the earth. This is 1876.
Wow.
Once again, and we are living in those days.
I love it. Well, first off, I'm with you, Doug. After 60 episodes, interviewing a lot of people about multiple incursions, that's where I've been leaning this whole time. The wife of Ham, it just seemed kind of a difficult theory to propagate, to be honest. But it seems like there's localized cataclysms in like stories like Sodom and Gomorrah. And we talked to so many people who talk about the evidence for the dynasties all over the world. Yeah. And so you have these dynasties in Peru, in Japan, in China, and so how did these dynasties get to be where they were, and then what happened to them? You know what I mean? Yeah. Did they all build before the flood, or were they kind of tinkering all over the world at different periods of history?
Probably both. I think the Cyclopean architecture that we see, a lot of it was before the flood. The pyramids probably were too. But yeah, why is it there's these ziggurat structures all over the world, even underwater off China? And yeah, they're all over. What are they? These are temple towers. These are replications of the Tower of Nimrod. And what is it? It is evolutionary spiritual development man to attain God man.
Is it like a Mount Hermon type symbolism?
In function, yeah, it's where you connect with the gods, and then they can come down, and man can transmogrify, actually move into to becoming God men, to become deified. That's the satanic lie. You shall be as, you could say God, or you could say gods. That was the promise. That's the deception. In fact, Paul says that because people did not receive the love of the truth in 2 Thessalonians 2, God will send upon them a supernatural influence that leads to error in order that they might believe the lie.
Does this say delusion, or is that certain?
Well, it's
strong delusion.
Planos. It's like planets that are. It just means they're because they reject the truth. God is going to send upon them supernatural influence. They'll believe the lie. In other words, you shall not die. You shall be as gods. And so,
Doug, do you think these ziggurats, like at the top, like you're saying, when they're trying to create a portal, open a portal, or a stargate, or whatever you want to call it?
It's a gate of the gods. See, Babylon. Babylon. Hebrew means confusion, but in the actual Babylonian means gate of the gods or portal. So the portal, that way, man is now intersecting with the forbidden domain, multidimensional. And so that's where I believe Nimrod was transformed, and he lost his soul. So when he died, he went into the abyss. And so in the tribulation, he comes out of the abyss because he lost his humanity. By the way, when everyone takes the mark of the beast, same thing happens. They're going to say, you'll not die, you'll live forever. And by the way, you can't buy, trade, or sell. And you're going to get well if you're sick. They got all these promises. And they don't know that when you take this, Dr. Carrie Madej has said this whole vaccine agenda is a transhumanist. It's to transform us so we're no longer human. She's documented this. So that's how close we are.
Yeah, Tim has said a lot of the same things, Doug, about the idea that we remove that thing which uniquely in our DNA makes us human. And that's in the same idea of being transhuman. You have this genetic upgrade, right? These markers.
Was that why they beg for death and they can't get there?
Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to die. Okay. You take the mark. You're not going to die. And so they, when God lets out of the abyss, Revelation 9, who are there? These angels that sinned in Genesis 6. What did they look like that when they left their habitation and came and took on human physicality and cohabit with women? So after they've been in Tartarus all these years, look at they're hideous creatures. And the angel of the abyss, which is Apollyon, Abaddon, he is given a key. That means passive voice in Greek means God allows it. Okay, you want to worship false gods? I'll give you some false gods to worship. These gods are going to unleash Tartarus and let these creatures out on mankind, and they're going to be looking for, this is horrific. When we want to die, but they won't be able to die. Why? Because you want to worship false gods? I'll give you a good taste on it. What do? In the end of Revelation chapter 9, they're blaspheming God. They're not repenting. And so all the way through, you see God confirming mankind in their hardness, just like he did with Pharaoh.
Wow.
Pharaoh hardened his heart. God confirmed in his hardness. So that tells me you don't mess with the Lord. You don't need to fear the devil. You need to fear the Lord, who we say no to him. He will give us those free choices, but the consequences are going to be in God's hands. And we don't want to get into patterns of saying no to him, because God will begin to confirm us in our hardness. And when that's confirmed, we're abandoned. It's called an abandonment judgment, as we see in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 to the end of the chapter.
Man, it's hardcore. It's heavy.
Yeah, it's reality.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into when we started this podcast.
Okay.
Looking for better answers. So you believe there's going to be 3 incursions? We've already had 2. Is that kind of, and L.A. Marzulli believes there's been way more than that? Is that kind of what I heard you say?
They've been incremental throughout history, but they've been destroyed.
Yeah.
Look what happened in South America and other places. They come on the scene, they corrupt mankind, they do the cradle, they call it the headboarding. Why? They want to emulate these Quetzalcoatl and these hybridized entities, but their sexual orientation is sodomy. Their diet is cannibalism, Kanaba'al, the priests of Baal. So as they seek to displace mankind, then God sends judgment and wipes them out. We don't know what happened to them. Because he says it's not time.
Yeah.
So there have been multiple incursions, but when it comes to the final incursions, like Pember says, it'll be global, and that's happening now.
Do the dumbs relate to Tartarus at all?
No, I don't. They're actual physical structures. Tartarus is a domain that is created by God as a prison house, and I think that's much deeper in the what is known as the heart of the earth, whereas dumbs are built by man, as for different purposes. But we know that there's part of the reasons is not only for the elites to hide in the coming events that they know are happening, but there's a lot of people that I've talked to that have been there. They've seen all these things in like large test tubes. Things are gestating, and there's actually the creation of these creatures that are going to show up on the battlefield of Armageddon, as we see in Revelation. That will be the complete armies of Antichrist, with all weapons pointed towards Jesus Christ when he returns in Revelation 19:19.
Dang.
Hey, Doug, that brings up what I was going to ask a little bit. Laura touched on it a few times on this Nephilim host mother program, and then talked about you and your research and into that. Can you unpack that just a little bit for us? And I mean, Laura did to an extent, but like, what's going on? Because I know that it happens. You said that some of that stuff happens in the dumbs, right? They're actually doing some of that preparation or genetic splicing or whatever they're doing. Some of that's happening there. Some may be happening off Earth in the sense of in this craft. But can you talk a little bit about what's going on with this host mother program, and then talk about the hybrids that are coming out of it?
So for me, as someone who's been working with trauma-based mind control survivors for 35 years now, my goal is never been to get occupied with the anecdotal history. So my goal is to look at the trauma, and I've been trained in understanding the symptomatology of trauma. So my primary role would be, if it was a professional side, I'm a pastor, but it would be working with the trauma and helping that person in the multiple personalities or their dissociative identity disorder come together into integration. That's always been the goal. So, but during this history, there's been, especially with the women I've worked with that are part of members of the royal families, all of them, and everyone that I've worked with has been programmed with Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, Nazi doctor at Auschwitz. All of them had biological fathers that sold their daughters over to Satan to get power. You want power? You let me have your daughters. It's okay. We give the daughters.
Wow.
They hand over to people like Mengele. Prince Philip is one of the big handlers for this global agenda. And so these women have royal bloodlines. They have a certain iniquity force that qualifies them to then be conditioned and trained to be able to conceive a hybrid. So we now know that all these people that are the breeders that have conceived and given birth to hybrids, there was a ritual that occurred in 1943 that in the Merkabah, the Satanic throne, Merkabah is word for throne chariot in Ezekiel chapter 1. So Satan has a counterpart to that. In that throne chariot, there is the power and capacity to split genes and DNA and restructure things. I mean, he knows how to do this. He was present when man was created, before he fell, Job 38. So they described it. And the neshama, that's the lamp of the Lord, Proverbs 20, verse 27. It's not a memory. It's a capacity to know, because the neshama, the breath of life, knows. So I've learned how to identify that. And when people are at conception, they know what happens. It's not a memory. It's neshama. Again, Proverbs 20, verse 27. I've written an article on my website. So they describe this conception event. Now, in this, it's corporate. There's individuals. God breathes in the breath of life at conception. Satan's there. He captures that life essence. He brings them into an environment, his throne chariot, and blends them in their pre-implantation identity. So when I say pre-implantation, I'm talking about, you can go online and look up how long is a fertilized embryo viable after conception. Can you freeze it? And you can look it up online. You can take frozen, fertilized, whatever they're called, the embryo, the fertilized
zygotes. Yeah.
You and freeze it, and they're viable years later. So this is what they did in the project. There was this conception event. Satan imparted a DNA source code for Nimrod in the event. It has to come from him. It's not natural. And then these people that are born into the project, they're implanted sequentially according to a plan years later.
Wow.
The last one implanted that I worked with was after Bengala's death in 1979, and she was a major player in terms of bringing forth the Apollyon Christ. So what we have is a sequence series of people who carry bloodline that are moving towards a goal, and Satan doesn't know the time, but he has resources in place. He must bring forth his Christ when the time is allowed. And so these women, they're born into the project at age 12. They can see, and they all say it's Satan. This is what they say. I'm not there to dispute it. This is what they say, that he is the one that's involved, which means his life along the line. He knows what happened to those angels of sin, Genesis 6. But what if God has him in a double bind? This is your only shot. And if you're going to create your seed and you pull off your final end time agenda, like he told Judas, what thou doest, do us quickly. And so I think God put Satan in a double bind, and he is now the progenitor. He is the actual father of the Antichrist and false prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So to have human women that have the capacity to do this, they have to be prepared. So everyone I've worked with has been in this bloodline from the very beginning of this work. God has, for whatever reason, has given me mostly those that have been programmed by Mengele, and they're all born into the project, and they're all royals.
Wow. That's heavy.
And can they be delivered? Those people can be delivered, right?
Oh, yeah, we have a woman now, one of the first one I worked with that started in 1990, 91. She's fully integrated. She's been integrated for over 10 years. She's phenomenal. She works with survivors now, supernaturally charged by the Lord. Wow. And she's able to pick up stuff that I don't even see when we're working with these people.
Let's go.
And it accelerates
the
integration. I started working with this back in 1991. It took, like this first person I worked with, it took over 15 years for her to be integrated. I'm working with a woman right now, highly complex, and I started working with her in November. As of today, she's almost fully integrated. That's less than a year. That's like on steroids. What took me 15 years when I began is happening now in a year or less.
Doug, does that happen because the trauma is so horrific that they actually fracture their personalities into these? Oh,
absolutely.
Just to deal with.
You have to gather up all this fragmentation and the demonic structures that are layered in. You have to detox them from that, and you have to do a lot of work. I mean, I've been involved with thousands of exorcisms. That's not a problem. Demons and fallen angels are not the same. Demons are not a big deal, but if you're going to get in there deeply around the human spirit where principalities are attached, these big guys, they're not demons. You don't find the Prince of Persia begging to go into pig. Okay, this is battling with Michael, Matt. These entities where they're attached in a person's DID structure. The only way they're going to be removed is you have to displace them. You have to go in and reclaim what Satan has stolen from you from conception to implantation. He's stolen life essence, and he's created domains for himself.
Wow.
So I know this is hard. People can't get their mind around it. I know when my wife says, I don't understand what you're doing, but she sees the fruit of it, says, I like to see the fruit, but I don't know how you get there. And I said, that's okay. You don't have to know. Do
you think any woman experience sexual trauma can have this happen to them? Things like this?
I've worked with people that have had reports that have been familial abuse, mostly familial abuse, where it's usually incest and, very violent and dysfunctional families. When you're working with people like that don't have necessarily an occult history, but very fragmented and broken because of chronic trauma, their DID internalized fragmentation is random. It's reactive DID. Now, when it comes to the cult stuff that has an agenda, it is not reactive. it is planned. It is purposeful and ordered trauma to create splitting, to create identities and structuring, so the person becomes a multi-layered weapons platform.
Wow.
While the presenter is amnesic and doesn't even know what Russ Dizdar calls subpersonalities.
Dang.
Okay. So that, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's heavy. There's a lot of stuff that's been coming out over the years of child trafficking and all the layers. When you get into these rabbit holes, this stuff is just it's weird how it's all connected.
It is connected.
And you were talking about how some people have come to you and been in these deep underground military bases.
Yeah.
Can you describe a little bit more of that? Because, I mean, it might get our show canceled, but we've had a lot of people talk about it, but they haven't really talked about like any specifics, details. I'm just curious.
Well, what I remember, and it's anecdotal, so I don't have any way to I don't have a need to, Russ is he does a lot of that, which is, once forensic and get evidence and get people thrown in jail, which I think is marvelous. I can't track down all this stuff because I'm so involved with somebody sitting in front of me. I'm dealing with the evidence right there.
Yeah.
But
right.
What I've heard through the years is absolutely mind-blowing. When I first was working with this woman in Germany, I had to have a translator. I work with people all over the world. I got a pretty substantial group in South Africa. But Europe is a big one. Russ refers to Germany as the belly of the beast. So I was working with this woman, Lily, in Germany, and she only spoke German. She's German, and we had the German people there hosting her, and I'm helping her, trying to unravel, her trauma and her abuse. And she only speaks German, and so I started burrowing in and trying to see how things are structured. And she had somebody that was programmed by Prince Philip, because he's been a big handler. And this one that was programmed by Philip came out speaking perfect English. The person that I only knew German. It was like, didn't even know that was there. But because she was groomed by Prince Philip to service the kings of the earth sexually. They're all born to function as cult prostitutes. And so she began to describe being taken in vessels that could go in the air and under the water at the same time. And to describe this, I've worked with people, they've described that they could be anywhere on planet Earth within 15 minutes. I thought, well, I heard that. I don't know. It's anecdotal. I don't do anything with it. I just want to get to their trauma.
Right.
So I started doing research. I looked up Paul Laviolette, and he described, and he's a physicist, and he said, yeah, we have the technology and craft in existence that can go anywhere in the world in 15 minutes. And I heard this survivors. This guy's a scientist, okay?
Yeah.
And, people saying we need to get this technology out so we can have cheap energy and all that. I forget that former doctor, that ER guy, big Bill guy that is really promoting this whole thing. Disclosure,
Oh, Stephen Greer or whatever.
Yeah, Stephen Greer. He's definitely in the right stuff. So she started talking about being taken into these underground military bases and seeing these tubes and things look like creatures in liquid, and they're like in their gestation, is vast underground stuff. Not only from her, but heard from others. And I remember working with a woman that is a biological daughter of Prince Philip years ago, and fly out to Las Vegas where she lived and work with her. And she's a multiple, and her mother was Marie Helena de Rothschild of France, and very unique personality. And she, we were there at Las Vegas, and she said she had a little part to come out named Rachel. She said, Mr. Doug. She's just almost 6 foot woman, and just real childlike, likes to play around, be goofy. She says, Mr. Doug, can I tell you a secret? I said, yeah. I said, in the Caesar's Palace, you can go way down, and down the basement, there's a satanic throne there. And they do all these rituals, and they do this stuff. And he says, what else? There's a doorway there, and you can go through it, and you can be at Area 51, Groom Lake, in about 10 minutes.
Oh,
An underground, gravity thing. And she described it. She described what it was. And she said, let me tell you another secret. Did you know that Area 51, there's something more deeper than that? I said, what is it? And she's real childlike. She goes, shh, Area 52. He says, people in Area 52, the Area 51 don't know anything about that because it takes special rites of passage to get down there. I said, what's going on down there? She said, the Nephilim project. I didn't put that in her head.
Wow.
She's the one that told me. She said, they're breeding. She says, it's horrific. It's terrible. There's creatures and it's just awful things happen. That's going on there on Groom Lake, these military bases. They're interlinked with tunnels. And so we have, for a long time, the government even denied there was an Area 51.
Yeah.
And, so we do have those black projects that are Area 51, but on top of that, or below that, I should say, Area 52. And nobody on top knows this, but if you're going to go into Area 52, it takes a specific clearance. Now, she says, Mr. Doug, I have clearance. I said, well, what do you mean clearance? And she has it in her head. Here's the number. Well, her husband was a JAG at that Air Force base in California. I forget what it's called, where they launch rockets. There's an actual Air Force base in California. I don't remember what it's called. You'd recognize it if you heard it. I can't remember, but he worked there, and he had pretty high clearance. And so I told Steve, I said, your wife said that she has clearance to Area 52, and she's got a number. He says, well, I have access to the database. I know what my clearance is, and I know the levels all the way up to president. And so he put in her number.
Wow.
And you know what it said? This is a classification that's beyond president. He knew by what came back, no access allowed. It's above presidential grade. Wow. She had the code and access to Area 52.
That's crazy.
So just to recap, so you're dealing with trauma-based people, and they're telling you, and they're basically their split personalities are telling you all these stories.
Oh yeah, and it's to them. It's not like I'm making things up, because when you hear the same thing, and the same theme from people all over the world. It's like, is it a conspiracy that they're all getting together and coming up with the same story? Or is it all these different people from different backgrounds sharing the same narrative? And that's what it is. And that's what it is. And that's what it is. That's what it is.
That's what we say about Bigfoot, Doug. There's just too many people from different places saying the exact same thing, right? And I mean, at some point, you can't have a big mass hoax where people from all over the world are saying the same thing but are disassociated from each other, right?
Yeah, that's how you get started in all this. I mean, by now our listeners have taken plenty of red pills to get here. So these people, they're telling you these stories. How is that sort of shaping your worldview as you're hearing more and more of this stuff? I mean, are you talking to a lot of other pastors or other Christians and just trying to get their heads wrapped around these things? Because it feels like most pastors are asleep to 99% of what we're talking about. And it's kind of disconcerting. It's kind of sad, actually.
Well, there's a few. I'm working with a woman in South Africa who's been very highly programmed by Mengele and also has given birth to offspring. And it's her own story. It all fits the narrative of everyone else. She's about 47, beautiful girl. Her pastor agreed to sit in, and he's a pastor of a pretty good sized congregation down there. Really understands spiritual warfare. I mean, he is not a novice. They have 4 prayer meetings a week in his church there at Melbourne in Cape Town. As we're working together, I said, well, what are your thoughts, Pastor Rob? He says, it's above my pay grade. But he's on board because he knows the person that is there, and he knows the integrity of who she is. So it's hard for people to get their mindset around this, because God never intended us to be able to grasp this level of evil. It's not normal.
Yeah.
Because the more evil it is, the more it triggers a natural defense in all of us, denial. This can't be true. There's no category for it. But what happened to me through the years is that I had a God box, and I had a pretty solid theological framework. Okay, I mean it was solid.
Mm-hmm.
When I started working with this, my God box was not big enough.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. So the problem wasn't the level of evil, is how big do I need to expand what God has allowed to happen? Just like in Job, why would God allow his servant Job, who was the most upright person on the planet Earth, to be handed over to Satan? How in the world can that happen?
Yeah.
You incited me against my servant Job, Job chapter 2, verse 3. How can that allow that? Because there is a contest. There is a battle that broke out between Satan and God prior to the creation of man. And according to Jack Langford in The Gap is Not a Theory, is there was a vast history of Lucifer before he fell, maybe 4 to 4.5 billion years. Now, the earth we know now is 6,000 years old in terms of what we live in terms of life. The dirt is older than that. So as Satan fell, Tohu Bohu, Genesis 1:2, the earth is without form and void. That's the result of judgment. We know that from Isaiah 45 and Jeremiah 4, etc. All right. So there's this battle, this ancient battle that broke out, and God doesn't give us the details. It broke out in the ancient past when Lucifer, Hillel ben Shakir, the original manifestation of Jesus Christ as the morning star, he rebelled and he said, I'll be like the Most High. Well, he was thrown down. And according to Jack Langford, he was in his trade. He was involved with creating sanctuaries there in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 and following. He in his third section on The Gap is Not a Theory, he said that Satan was involved with all kinds of genetic experimentation, and his goal was to be like the Most High God, create like something like Homo sapien. He never made it. There was all these experiments. Do you think God created Tyrannosaurus Rex? I don't think so. I think this is something, if you look at these reptilians, violent creatures, I believe this was a part of that, which was the genetic program prior to the creation of man. But that's just my thinking on that.
Yeah.
So
I'm there.
This conflict that broke out, the adversaries on earth when man was created and was there in the garden. So he comes into the garden as Nakash. Well, what's Nakash in the Hebrew? The language in the Hebrew is kind of like a hologram. You can take like Nakash and you look at the Hebrew lexicon and it says 3 roots, 1, 2, 3. And it's all spelled the same. First root, serpent. Second root, shining one. Third root, divination, something that has magical powers. So which one is it? Well, if you're a Hebrew, you can say, well, depending on the context, serpentine, but he wasn't crawling on his belly. This is a manifestation of a creature that is supernatural, intelligent. He's upright. He is a shining one, a luminous being, and he has supernatural powers of divination. That's all inherent in the word Nakash. So he's there, draws man aside. Man lines himself up with Satan. So the contest has begun. All of human history, from the fall of man until the second coming of Jesus, is a virtual courtroom. If you go online on my website, let's see, I think it's in the video section. It's called the Celestial Court series. It's four messages on the celestial court, why the church will be in heaven during the day of the Lord, because the church will be the legal criterion by which Satan will be deposed. Only church age believers are chosen by the Lord to displace Satan in his hierarchy. So with Israel rejecting their Messiah, like the earth, so the program, God planned for Israel, they defaulted temporarily. There's still a future for Israel, but they're temporarily set aside. Hardness of heart is, the blindness of the heart is happened to Israel until the fullness of Gentiles come in. Then all Israel will be saved. So what's going on now? It's called mysterion, mystery, secret. God is calling out from among the nations the people for his name. And Paul says to the Corinthians, who are taking one another to court. He said, civil court, not criminal. He said, isn't there a wise man among you that can solve these civil issues? Do you not understand, Christians, that the saints will judge the world, the saints will judge angels? Hello? What does all that mean? God is preparing a big change to occur. So the principalities and powers that are now ruling in the second heaven, they will be deposed. But that cannot happen until the rapture and the church is glorified. So the question is, how close are we? And Satan knows that the church is his nemesis. And I believe that he has a genocidal agenda to wipe out every Christian for the rapture. Because he knows that the church is God's assigned nemesis for Satan. He knows this. So you ask about pastors. I believe that through the years of ritual activity, there have been Christians, pastors in particular, have been targeted to dumb them down, to believe that Genesis 6 is a line of Seth. That's eisegesis. Yeah. There's nobody in the first 3 centuries who believed in that nonsense. Julius Africanus first came up with this, line of Seth thing, and then Augustine picked up on it. But nobody in the first 3 centuries believed in this nonsense. So you ask a pastor today, who do you believe the sons of Beniha Elohim, the sons of God in Genesis 6 are? Oh, their party line is the line of Seth. It's not even exegesis. So what is dumbed down pastors? There's been a supernatural work of the enemy, because he knows the church is his potential enemy. So any church that begins to function as salt and light, and that pastor is teaching the word of God, then it's a threat to him. Because every church that really has some measure of salt and light has been infiltrated. Satan has his assets there to whatever measure he perceives of them as a potential threat. And so we started out with over 100 people, and we're just reduced down to a handful. I mean, the enemy has absolutely laid waste because of what we're doing, because we have not stopped. And the enemy he's tried to take us down many times over the years, and we're still going. And why? Because we already got the playbook. God wins.
Yeah.
And
God
we're on the
wins.
winning side. No matter what we go through between now and then, we keep persevering and overcoming, because the overcomer himself, Jesus Christ, lives in us.
That's right.
Amen to that. That's the truth.
I mean, it makes so much more sense to us now after a year of really unpacking the war.
Doing this.
I mean, we really understand personally this last year of why you need a savior. And it sounds like he's going to come back and destroy all these creatures that are going to come out of the ground. It sounds like. And I liked your point to that, Doug, is that a lot of people, they just can't imagine the darkness being as gross and just... It feels fantastical. We've been dumbed down to think that, all this stuff is just movies, sci-fi, but it's really happening.
It is.
And I have a couple questions left. So you believe in the rapture. We've talked a lot about that on our show. A lot of people very adamantly disagree on this particular thing. Most people agree on a lot of the things on our show, but the rapture itself, different schools of thought. What's your take and why?
When it comes to eschatology, there's the eschatology of Israel. And when you read, we know Matthew chapter 10 and Matthew 15, I came to none other than a lost sheep of the house of Israel. So when Jesus came, he came to fulfill the promise to the fathers to redeem Israel. That's why he came. Now on the cross, he made provision for the whole race, but nationally, he came as a Jew. He came to fulfill the promises of the fathers. We see that in Luke chapter 1, as Zacharias is giving his declaration there. All right, so the Gospels, the Jews did not accept him as their Savior, and then he's given another offer, an opportunity in the book of Acts, I should say, Israel, to receive Jesus. Acts chapter 3, if you repent, he will send back Jesus, and times of refreshing will come from the Lord. They didn't. So the stoning of Stephen, that was the door slammed then. It's over. And so God he had a secret. It's called a mystery. Romans 16, 25, 26, Ephesians 1, 9 through 11, Ephesians 3, 1 through 11, Colossians 1, 20, 27, Christ, great mystery, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Messiah in you? Where do you find that in the Old Testament? Where do you find Messiah in you? Doesn't exist. The word mystery means secret. It's a sacred secret. So with Israel hardening their heart, God says, okay, that's my occasion to unfold my eternal purpose. And so on that eternal purpose, we have a third group now. It's members of Christ. Before Pentecost, it was just Jew and Gentile. At Pentecost, we have the birth of a new race. One new man, humanity, Ephesians 2:15. A new man, new humanity. This is a race of head and body are called the Christ in 1 Corinthians 12:12. Okay. As a human body has many members, so also is the Christ. Okay. So Paul is the revelator of all this. And so he gives a unique eschatology for the church. If you go back to the eschatology of Israel, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, that has to do with Israel and the nations. And I've unpacked this in the past. When it comes to the eschatology of the church, that only comes through Paul. He's the apostle to the Gentiles. So when you look at the two eschatologies, there's an interrelationship, but a sequencing is different. So to cut it all short, is that when the biblical hermeneutics, that is, how do you understand Scripture? There's Gentiles, Jews, and the Church of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 30. There's now three categories. Before Pentecost, there's only two. Now, what is the eschatology of the church? You're not going to find it anywhere else but in the Apostle Paul. You can't find it. It's not there. So if you try to blend the eschatology of Israel with the eschatology of the church, you have a Judaized eschatology. And I can tell that they have a Judaized eschatology by how they perceive the rapture. So what I did, just went through the Pauline epistles and also the Gospels, where you have the eschatology of Israel presented there, like especially Matthew 24. That's the eschatology of the Jews. It's very clearly there. Hey, when the Antichrist comes, and you see the abomination spoken of the prophet Daniel, flee, get out of town. Pray that it's not on the Sabbath. Really? I need to pray? It's not on the Sabbath? I don't have to pray about it on the Sabbath. So he's given instruction to the Jews. Okay, one will be the field, one will be taken. What is that? Matthew 13. The angels come and they take out the tares, and the wheat goes into the barn. That is the analogy. The Jews at the second coming of Jesus go into the millennial reign of Christ. And so though one taken and one left in Matthew 24, same eschatological pattern found in Matthew 13 on the parable of the sower. Those taken are the unrighteous, and those of the righteous remain. It's the opposite of the rapture. It's just right there. I mean, it's like a no-brainer. Okay. So what I did is I thought, well, people are asking this kind of questions. And so I went and I did 4 lessons on the Blessed Hope. It's found on our video page. It's called the Blessed Hope. I give the basis of the hermeneutics. That is, what is the basis of my interpretation? And people that have been solid post-trib or mid-trib, they've gone through that. And he says, first time I've ever heard anything that makes sense to me, because I don't have an agenda. I don't have an agenda. Well, I got to prove this and prove that. He said, well, the rapture theory only comes from Mary McDonald, some occultist back, and then Darby was influenced by him, and they come up with all this hodgepodge stuff. Darby, he translated the entire Bible into French and English by the time he's 18. He was his own thinker. He didn't need Mary McDonald to come up with rapture. He just found it in the Pauline epistles. Okay. So people come up with all this stuff because I think they're kind of demonized in their thinking, to be honest with you. It doesn't mean they're all bad, but I'll just be frank about it. All right. So I did 4 lessons on it. And so if people have questions about it, they can listen to it. And if my hermeneutics of what I understand is the rapture is off, show me where I'm off. I don't have an agenda, but just what does the word say? But I use the Apostle Paul, that unique revelation was given to him to help us understand that the church has to be out of here before the tribulation, because in my series on the celestial court, I give the reason why. The church has to be in heaven as vice regents of the king, the judge. So when he's judging the nations, there has to be a legal basis by which he does it. And the church and all the sufferings that the church has gone through from Pentecost to the rapture is the legal criterion by which God judges the nations. He's vindicating the sufferings of the church for 2,000 years.
Dang.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, all of history.
That's all.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, so you're thinking generations and generations.
Absolutely. All the sufferings the church gone through will be the legal criteria by which, from Revelation 6 through 19, Jesus Christ from heaven, and using the Jewish terminology, tabernacling in heaven, that's us. We're his dwelling place. But he uses Hebrew language because when the church is no longer here, everything shifts back to Israel. So it fits.
That's
I mean,
point.
to me, the hermeneutics of the mystery of the that we have in the Bible, everything fits. You don't have to squeeze things and try to make them fit.
Yeah.
It either fits or it doesn't. And if it fits, it's the way God meant it to be. It just fits. So anyway, people can check it out for themselves.
It's like the rocks and the megaliths in Peru. They just fit. They fit perfectly.
They fit together. Yeah. No mortar.
If you have an accurate hermeneutics, the plan of Israel, the nations, and the church, and you see how they interrelate, but there's distinctions, it just said, bingo, I got the key.
I mean, a lot of people come on our show, Doug, and they say that 10 plagues of Egypt is God's people were saved, but they had to endure a few of the plagues, but not all of the plagues.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't make sense that we would be in this confusing time where literally, like, truth is just getting harder and harder and harder to figure out what's true, who's planted, who's throwing out, false propaganda everywhere, no matter what it is. And I guess one of my last questions is like, so do you know when you encounter hybrids, and are there any character traits that you can distinguish right away, or is it just so hard to distinct that you don't even know?
Well, Dr. David Jacobs says they're now integrating into culture. I don't think I've ever seen one personally. Now, in the cult and underground and under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Satanic throne, I mean, they're seen there. Phil Schneider saw them.
Yeah.
And he was assassinated for reporting these kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
Others have seen them. I haven't. But what they have described, he says, if it's a quintessential hybrid, it's not this reptilian or gray. It's really more quintessential, which is more like in the order of the Antichrist. They're the beautiful people. They look like the ultimate Ubermensch, And they say that, they look human, but if you ever look in the eyes, it's like, there's no soul there. They are humanoid without a soul. Why? Because they're hybrids.
Are they going to be giant, Doug, again?
Not the actual quintessential hybrids. They are like the Antichrist. They're quintessential man. We know from the Kandahar giant, Steve Quayle and Tom Marzulli.
Yeah.
There was one they shot six-fingered. He was 12 or 15 feet high. He weighed, 1,400 pounds. He was massive. They flew him out. It was a horrific ordeal. So they are those. And I believe that's a part of the end time army. If you look at
we get those videos all the time, Doug.
Yeah.
People send us videos of them. They sent us one the other day. Like, one was like night vision crawling under in a hole next to a tank, and it looked as big as a tank, and it went underground. Do you see that one, Luke?
No, I didn't see that one.
We get those, and there's like this video of like these screams coming from a hole underground that sounded like giants. I don't know. We get that stuff a lot because that's what we talk about, Doug. That's kind of one of the main things we talk about. So we're right there with you.
I was just going to say, on the website on the video page, of course, under the Bite Show page, I have all the recordings I did years ago. But our web administrator took some of those recordings on the Bite Show page and put them into videos, and that's in the videos.
Okay.
Then he transcribed several of them, two of them, called The Day of Visitation and The Helmet of Salvation. So that's now it's been transcribed from audio, so it's very conversational. But the answer to your question about some of the things, the Blessed Hope is only in the video section for those that want to see a little bit more about eschatology. But I can send you the PDF links to the transcribed on the Day of Visitation, which is a real key to understand what's coming for the church, because the church is going to go through her own tribulation before Israel and the nations. And we're about to enter into a vortex of suffering for the church that's going to be unbelievable. And many people are going to think we're in the tribulation, but we're not. That's what Paul was writing when he wrote 2 Thessalonians, because they were being told that they were in the day of the Lord. And so he has to counter that. So anyway, I can send you the PDF if you're interested.
Well, please do. We'd love that.
Kind of helps us prepare what's coming. And the helmet of salvation. The helmet of salvation is found in the armor. What salvation is that? That's eschatological salvation. There's a hope of salvation, not initial, but final. And when we see how the word salvation is used in it can be initial, it can be progressive for sanctification, it can be final eschatological salvation. It's in the word, but sometimes we've been lazy to unpack it. So I try to unpack that so when people see it, I hope they have an aha moment and say, our hope is a blessed hope. We're not waiting for Antichrist. Our blessed hope is we're waiting for the person of Jesus Christ, who rescues us from the wrath to come. 1 Thessalonians 1:10. He comes to rescue us from something.
Right.
It's going to be desperate. And as we face that, then we as Christians, we need to be right with the Lord. We need to be clean. We can't afford to be walking in hidden sins. We have to be like 2 Peter 3 says, looking for and hastening the coming day of God. How? In all righteousness and holiness of life. So holiness is power. Holiness is authority. And I know in my life, when I've had to deal with darkness, anytime I've walked in darkness, I get trounced. The more I'm walking in faith dependence upon the Lord Jesus Christ and holiness, I have power and authority. To whatever degree I'm walking in holiness, I see power and authority and I see fruit. Without it, it's not there.
Amen. Doug has been great. I got one tiny little question. December 25th is Nimrod's birthday. I think you might have mentioned that sort of offhandedly.
These are where the big rituals occur all throughout history. I don't know what people think about Alexander Hislop's 2 Babylons, but he's the one that identified December 25th as Nimrod's birthday. And I think that's in tradition. And I don't get into it. If people want to celebrate on that, that's their Christmas. Just remember that Jesus was not born on December 25th. He's born somewhere. My guess would be, according to Dr. Michael Heiser, maybe September 11th on the 3 BC, which is kind of interesting. So in September. So it was when the shepherds were, tending the flocks. It wasn't the winter. But if people celebrate that,
isn't that Feast of the Trumpets too? Isn't that Feast of the Trumpets as well?
I don't believe that the church has to be tied to Jewish.
No, but I mean just Jesus' birthday. Like I wonder if
I don't know. It could have. I don't know if it could have been. But,
No, I'm not. We're not Hebrew roots people. We're not tied to the.
And all the anecdotal and plus people like Hislop's 2 Babylon, they see the December 25th is Nimrod's birthday. So people do celebrate Christmas. It doesn't mean you're celebrating Nimrod. If that's how you remember Jesus, just remember that he was not born on that day.
Yeah.
So that's Saturnalia. That is Roman festival thing, which goes back to Nimrod.
Man, we could keep talking forever. We'll have to have you back on, Doug, because especially the creatures, the gray aliens. I don't think you told us what you think the grays and the insectolins are specifically. I think we almost got to it, but we were talking more about the dumbs. Did we get to that, Luke? Yeah.
I would just say that there are mutations. There are the first generation quintessential hybrid that brings forth the Antichrist has to come from Satan, the DNA source code. The other hybridization programs, there's going to be mutations, and there's going to be a plethora, a mixture between the DNA of different animals and things like we see in the Book of Enoch. And people report that's going on too. So it's a multi-pronged hybrid breeding program. So you're going to have these different hybridization of creatures, humanoid and animal, like we see reported in I believe is like just a historical reference or commentary in the first book of Enoch. We see some of that. And so what we hear from the anecdotal is that they've seen these creatures. I remember one of the girls I worked with be in an environment of these creatures and be violently raped, and it's just horrific. And the abuse and the fragmentation is off the scale. It's very horrific. And I would just say to people that when they think about this level of evil, God never meant us to have to think like this. To eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's one root system. Yin and yang, light and dark, good and evil, it's all has one root system, one tree. So Satan does the Hegelian dialectic, and he understands that. So if we're trying to think through things that are beyond our God-designed capacity to think, be occupied with Jesus. Be looking off and away to Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith, and just say, Lord, I want to be faithful to you every day. If I don't comprehend all this evil, then God's not requiring that. And the only reason I'm in it is because I've had to understand this to see people go free. It's not because I'm just so interested and caught up with evil. I'm not. I've been pulled into it, kicking and screaming, because people are trapped there. And I want to see him get out. And like it says at the end of Matthew 25, you came and visited me when I was in prison. Jesus in prison. He's imprisoned in everyone who's been held captive in this generational SRAD trauma-based mind controls.
Yeah, you're in the business of freedom, Doug. Love it. Yeah.
What it's about.
I had one more last thought. Sorry, it keeps going. When you were talking about the Nakash in the garden, in the shiny one, the reptilian, does that relate to the story of the Transfiguration in any way?
Yeah, on the video section, I did Jesus Christ, the Bright and Morning Star. This is huge because that is going to come to fruition in the church in the last days when Jesus Christ is the morning star rises in our hearts. That's 2 Peter 1:19. So what happened to Jesus on Mount of Transfiguration is that there was a proleptic, that is a prophetic revelation. And if you look at the last two verses in Matthew 16, some of you will not taste death until you see the coming of the Son of Man and the glory of his Father and his elect angels. You see him coming in his kingdom. And 6 days later on Mount Hermon, not Tabor, Hermon, a high mountain. That's Mount Hermon. So why there?
Yeah.
Well, like Dr. Michael Heiser says, this is a shot across the bow to principalities and powers that eminent domain is about to be taken.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is declaring from that place, you came down and your goal was to wipe out the human genome. Here I am. I'm the victor. I'm the Son of Man. And the glory of his second advent glory shone through in his mortal body. And that is a picture of the morning star at the end. This is where we're headed. Not that we will all look like that, but I believe there's a final transformation in the church leading up to rapture that will be a shot across the bow, confirming the principalities and powers that eminent domain is about to be taken. Church raptured. You're going down, Satan. God's new man is coming into ascendancy. God's ultimate counterpart to the German goal of Übermensch is going to come into ascendancy. And Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 5, he opens up the scrolls. What is that? He is the royal heir, holds the title deed of planet Earth. And he opens up those scrolls and said, I'm claiming back Earth as Son of Man for man. It's man that's to be the king of the earth, not you, Satan. So that's victory.
Yeah. That is. Domain.
That's the deed. We've talked about that. That's the deed, the deed to earth.
He's the royal heir, Hebrews 1:2. He comes back as Son of Man. I have the right to take this back. Adam sold out to Satan. He's ruling it now. I'm come to take it back. And all these judgments from Revelation 6-19 are his judgment to cleanse the earth, prepare the earth for his rule and reign for 1,000 years. It's legal. He does it legally.
Yep.
Yeah, we've talked to Tim Ballerino extensively about the legal authority.
Yeah.
And it's heavy, but it's great. I love the DNA talk. That's where this show's lived. It's just crazy how much DNA and genetics is how you read the Bible. And I don't know what people are doing, but it makes so much more sense now. I mean, it's hard to tell a kid some of these things, you know? It's hard to teach children. You grow up in the church and some of these advanced themes you don't even get. I just turned 40 and now I'm like, I'm finally understanding some things in life. But you can understand the cataclysms and the events in history, and like you were saying, it all fits together in one piece. Yeah. The whole story. So, Doug, thanks so much. Is there a way that you can tell our listeners where they can interact with you or buy your books or anything you have?
Material.
Or get in contact with you?
Well, yeah, I'll send you those. I don't have them on the website. The links to those 2 books are transcribed that might help people if they're interested in
Cool.
the eschatology that's unique to the church. But
And your website?
Yeah, it's dougriggs.org.
Okay.
Dougriggs.org, and it's broken into different sections. And we have the SRIDID page, we have teaching page, we have counseling page, and we have the video page, which is some of the transcribed messages from the Bright Show. So, but on there, there's also a contact page as well. So, yeah, I don't know if I can get to everything because I've got a lot on my plate right now. So it's not that I want to avoid people, but I sometimes are just not able to get back to everybody. So.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you getting back to me. I reached out to the website and just for your time tonight. I mean, this is.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
This has been awesome. Thank you for joining us and hanging with us. And
all right.
Yeah. All right, Doug. Thanks, man. We're praying for you. I know you tread in darkness, and we get to taste of that when we put the truth out there. So we get some of that, but
yeah,
definitely be putting you on our prayer list, man.
Very much appreciated.
Yeah,
very much. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Like L.A. Marzulli say, tell her me to get either on the air or in the air. That's what.
Yeah.
That's what he did say that. We had him on the show. He said the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.